Yes, it is. And I have
Yeah,
to
always
continue.
tells you no. Hello, welcome to Oral Hygiene. It's the podcast where we look at educational films, experimental and caught films, interesting documentaries. This is Matt coming back to do a chat about music. Is former Curtis Mayfield band leader, session dude, having an album coming out this year, right? Is that still the case?
We're hoping
Maybe.
for the end of the quarter,
Okay. Well,
first
hello, Buzz
quarter.
Amato.
Hey, how's it going?
And what cafe is that? It's something cafe, right?
Oh, Muse Cafe.
Muse. Oh, I should be able to remember that. I told you my Muso story, did I?
I,
Maybe not.
maybe
Maybe I
not.
didn't bring it up last time. It's when I first came back to Japan, I was in this makeshift apartment for a real apartment, but I was only in it for a month, waiting to go into the real apartment, and the oop, yeah, it was a company apartment. So the girl coming in the next month came to check it out and brought her friend because she didn't know me, and I guess thought I might be creepy or something. So they see a couple synthesizers and guitars sitting around in there, and this lady in an Australian accent is like, "Oh, you must be a muso." What?
Yeah, we
Like it
can't
was,
have that living here.
yeah, like it was some kind of insult or something. Like, "Oh my god, like what a geek!" I'm like, I thought having musical instruments was cool.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Lisa's on the bridge playing sax with basically it was Sonny Rollins, but she's like, Lisa, get away from that jazz
Yeah, then they had a song about later, I think. But anyway, today's movie, I don't believe in involves Sonny Rollins much. It
man.
is the Wrecking Crew, the L.A. based pool of session musicians, mostly known for playing on everything in the 1960s that wasn't Motown.
Mostly unknown for playing.
Yeah, yeah. Also, unfortunately, unknown. That's why we need documentaries like this. But Buzz, could you give us like the TV guide synopsis if you were a TV
Of
guide
the
writer?
film,
Yeah.
or well, basically, it there was a group of studio musicians in L.A. Through the '60s and early '70s. They had about a good 10 or 12 year run, and I think they said they played on over 10,000 different records and film and TV shows. So
Right.
these were extremely busy session musicians.
Well, I think drummer Hal Blaine actually holds some kind of like Guinness record or something for being on the most number ones.
Seven years in a row of record of the year.
All right. Oh, him
Yeah,
on drumming on all of them. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
still
all those guys have such an incredible legacy out of that period of time.
and a lot of times I'm like, oh, where did this sort of thing first come into your life? Where'd you first hear this music? And it was just there. This was inescapable music for anyone living in the Western world probably and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with all that music. I didn't know who was playing it, but I was alive and kicking when it was all happening.
So I guess where I first figured out like something, I remember when I was like 3 or 4 years old, just listening to in the car and listening to some pop record and just thinking, how can they do all of that without making a mistake? Like I was like, how could you play an entire song without making one mistake? Not understanding you have takes and all and overdubbing and all that at
Yes,
the time. A few years,
and the ability to punch in.
yeah, and when I first started to figure out that it wasn't necessary the bands playing on these would have been. Do you remember the comic strip Bloom County?
Yeah.
It's got where Opus the Penguin is dating a hippie girl who becomes shocked when she suddenly finds out the Monkees didn't play on their albums, in like
I
1986. So, but hey, I was like 7 years old. I was like, what? What's that mean? Oh my.
think a lot of people were shocked at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
Shocked and not shocked.
Well, they had like, I mean, the people playing on there was the best band, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, you got Hal Blaine and Carol Kay, and you got these great songwriters writing all your songs. Because when they finally did an album where they played stuff, it kind of tanked.
yeah. as a teenager, I wasn't cool enough to really know all the jazz and really that much about, deep session musicians. But even 14-year-old Matt knew to listen to Carol Kay when trying to learn to play the bass. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I don't know. What's your favorite, setting for these guys? I think my first note is about the fact that I would make Smile cassettes, the Beach Boys Smile cassettes, and make people listen to them back in the 90s. So obviously I'm into that whole Brian Wilson scene.
Right. Well, you know what's weird, because at that time, by the time I was 10, I was more of a I was listening to jazz, and I wasn't part of a lot of the pop music that was going around. Like the Beach Boys, I could not relate to them because, I'm in New York and they're talking about surfing, uh, and they're talking about cars, and I can't drive. So um, I didn't pay as much attention to it. Now I go back and listen to, what Brian Wilson did, and I'm just like, mind blown.
That's how it kind of works though, because the radio is just going to play you those surf hits, which are all well and good, but
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's what radio was in the 60s. It was just the hits.
yeah, because I actually, and that's an interesting thing to look at how the Wrecking Crew added to the recordings, because it starts off with the Beach Boys. It's like a garage band. Then they start to sound really slick because he's slowly replacing the musicians with the Wrecking Crew, and
All those groups.
in the late '60s albums, now they're recording in Brian Wilson's house and they're starting to play again. It turns out being like this weird minimalist music,
Yeah,
so,
it becomes a whole different vibe.
which I do like that vibe a lot, but you can definitely tell the difference between having these guys
Right.
play on your recordings and not.
Right. Because at that point, you want hits, and you want the people who are going to play those hits and know how to work together and function very well together.
Yeah, I mean, you're playing, these guys are literally, and gals were doing what, like 10, 12-hour days, like 6 or 7 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of times where they talked about, they'd go in the morning, cut 6 songs, and then come back that evening and cut six more, where they would knock out an album in a day.
I'm sitting here wondering, would that be fun or not be fun? I mean, you're getting paid, of course, so it's a job, but
It, you know, it, you can look at it now and it's all very glamorized,
yeah, of course.
but having been involved in sessions where I'm sitting there the entire day, um, it can drag on a little bit. The good thing about it is, especially if you're working with the same people, there's a camaraderie that happens, and so you have shared lives and shared stories and things like that.
I'm not a session guy, of course, but I've played in orchestras. I guess that'd be my analogy, because I know American amateur orchestras, maybe a 2 or 2.5 hour practice, whereas
Hmm.
the orchestras I played with in Japan are, at least like 5 hours.
Right.
And there was holiday once, and it was just like for like 3 days in a row. It was like 9 hours, and unfortunately, I play a cello, which is an instrument you can take a nap on. So,
I
I
happen to love the cello.
yeah, I think I fell asleep playing a few times. So that's kind of fun, but um, but yeah. Just when another section's working, I imagine that's just like boring as hell. I know Ringo complained on Sergeant Pepper's that all he played on Sergeant Pepper's was chess.
Yeah. He said he got very good at chess during those sessions,
Right. So
you know, and
I,
and that was, that was making an album an entirely different way than records had been made before. So, I could kind of see that.
right. But yeah, I guess the waiting would have to be the worst part.
Yeah, it sounds like from the Wrecking Crew, though, you didn't have a lot of waiting around going on. It was, here's your parts, or here's your roadmap, and by talking it through, figuring it out, playing, I don't think you had a lot of downtime.
Yeah, perhaps, but yeah, I guess that's the orchestra because it's like, the violins always they gets the most time spent because they usually have the fastest, most intricate passages. So you're sitting
And
there
the most
waiting.
people in their section.
Right, exactly. Because usually in the cello section, it's like, you're the one screwing up, because you can hear it. There's only like 6 people there.
Bad guy.
Yeah, yeah. So that happens from time to time. But um, oh, what was the thought I had? Oh, just a couple of thoughts I had. One is I actually really they bring up Dennis Wilson, so that's who I want to bring up.
Okay.
I actually really like his drumming. I understand why he wasn't playing on those sessions, but
Right.
just as a insane pounder, he was fantastic.
Yeah, and and that's been the case. That's still the case now. There's a lot of times the live musicians, the live players don't get to do the records
Yeah,
because it's two entirely different mindsets.
but yeah,
And
there's a I think it's 1980 Beach Boys performance where it has Mike Love and Dennis Wilson like hate staring each other on stage as Denny proceeds to play one of their surfing hits like way too fast with like a punk rock stomp.
uh,
I think that's when he was probably like one of them was like dating the other's daughter or something horrible like that. So I'm sure that was coming through too. But
that's the other thing in bands. You always get the drama, the conflicts. It, I think the difference between studio work and actually playing live is ego.
yeah,
In
yeah,
the
because you
in
guys
the
emerge it.
stu in the studio, you have to kind of relinquish that because it's about the song at that point. You're not looking at going beyond that 4 minutes or whatever the length of the song is. You do that and you're done. Whereas, with a band, there's so many dynamics involved with people that live, eat, and breathe and sleep together.
One thing that you can answer for me is I've never been entirely sure what they mean by a chart.
Okay, there can be a chart is an overall term. There can be several different iterations of a chart. You can go in with a complete score where everybody's part, from the bass player to the drummer, the guitar, everything is written out note for note. That's a chart. You can also have I want this chord here, these two chords in measure six, blah, blah, blah. That's a chart. So a chart is nothing more than a map. And depending on how detailed that map is going to be.
Yeah, because they flashed just one page of music where it was just like it was on sheet music, which was just listing the chords by letters. I was like, oh, I could
Right.
handle that. But
Yeah, and a lot of sessions are done that way.
yeah,
But then,
but
but then when you have things like Brian Wilson coming in, he's writing for you specifically. This, no, I want this on the piano, and he's got that written out. And I want this from so and so, and this is written out.
right. So I wonder.
Like the bass line to Good Vibrations.
Oh, it was
You
just
know,
straight up written out. Okay.
that was written out. Like Carol Kay said, she would have never thought of playing that.
Yeah, I
You know,
guess not. And I know some of the not complain, but people would point out to him, "Hey, these notes clash," and he's like, "Not when it's going to be with everything else." But
well,
I guess that's
I
what they
can't
call.
remember what song it was, but he brought in one chart, and it was, I think, in the key of D. And hey, G, that's my
Was that in the
cat.
key of D?
Yeah, the key that's in the key of G. Um, and she goes, Brian, I think you made a mistake. Everybody's chart is in D, but mine's in A. And he said, no, that's not a mistake. And when she played it, she was just like, I just can't believe it worked.
I have coming in the mail actually. It should arrive tomorrow or Friday. I just learned about this is off topic, but have you ever heard of the Gothic Symphony?
Uh-uh.
It's a guy named Havergal Brian. I just heard our podcast talk about it, and it was so insane. I was like, okay, I have to order this. It's a 2 hour symphony. The first half, which is its own thing, basically requires I think 300 people on
Oh,
stage.
geez.
And the second part requires like 900 people to perform it.
Not 900?
Some of them are off stage. There's like horn sections off stage. So there's
What
only like
stage can accommodate that many people?
uh, outdoor festival. I don't know, but
I guess, yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's just
That's,
it's only been like recorded like 3 times because it's that insane.
excuse me.
So
Yeah,
just to nothing in the record crew to match those proportions, of course. But yeah, I'm very
except for
curious to
some of
hear
those
that.
Phil Spector sessions.
Yeah, but he needed some reverb, right?
He needed reverb, and he needed like four piano players,
He had
four
to wave the
guitars.
he had to wave a gun around at the session musicians for a while.
Yeah.
He's a bugaboo, right? It's like
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
it's like Birth of a Nation or Triumph of the Will in the movie world. It's like you have to acknowledge it. And in Phil Spector's, it's still great music, but you're like, oh God, separate the artist, please.
Yeah, because he made some great records,
Yeah, no doubt of that. But I
but
guess, and then
you
in
know,
England, was it? I guess Joe Meek would be the equivalent of a person who kind of crashed and burned, but made some great records.
yeah.
But I do love his. Was it I Hear New World album? That's fantastic stuff. Sorry, way back to that other question I originally asked. Though I guess what is the setting that you most like to hear the Wrecking Crew in?
Uh,
Maybe a
you- uh,
jazzy one. I don't know.
Um, it would have been interesting to hear them play some actual jazz, because most of them, and even the same thing with Motown session players, they were all jazz players, and I think that's what kind of gives you the freedom to interpret things much differently than how if I was just a standard rock guitar player or something, I'm going to look at things differently than somebody who can look at it from that perspective and this other perspective. And so, that would have been great to hear them knock out some, good straight ahead to see how it sounded.
Yeah, I guess Herb Alpert doesn't count.
No, the
But
original smooth jazz.
yeah, but that was a whole nother like facet of the Wrecking Crew. Of course, I've heard that stuff, but I just never really, thought too hard about all the lounge music and stuff they were rocking out.
Right. Well, they had night jobs as well. So, because most of them were still gigging when they had time off,
Yeah, I guess they were
which
on the
wasn't
road.
much, but
Did any of these guys find themselves into like any of those 50s cool jazz West Coast albums?
I don't think so.
Okay, because I was thinking that might be a place where you'd hear a few of these guys, but
Carol Kay played jazz guitar in some groups and things, but nothing that I would know off the top of my head.
right, okay.
But she worked the scene uh, as a jazz guitarist for a while.
But then we got like I don't know, did Glenn Campbell seem he was more of a country guy, so he would have different
He
chops.
got that misnomer just because of where he came out solo wise. Glenn Campbell is an amazing guitar player.
Oh, most certainly. But
And you know, he definitely had that. I'm not even sure where he was from, but he kind of had like that Midwestern naivete about him, because in the Wrecking Crew book, I don't know if you've ever read that. There's a lot of anecdotes about, like, he would talk about he couldn't read a note of music, so when they were given a chart, he would have to ask Tommy Tedesco, "How does this go?" And then Tommy would play it for me. He's like, "Okay, thanks."
oh, actually, when we were talking about charts, I actually was going to kind of bring up could Glenn Campbell read a chart? And I was like, oh, of course he could. He was a Wrecking Crew guy, but apparently not. Okay.
No.
But
I think there were a few in there that didn't read music.
right. It was funny because when I was younger, first reading books and stuff about the Beach Boys. I was like, oh, he must have been so excited to be called up to, play Brian Wilson's part for a few months, right? Now I'm like, oh, he must have felt like he was slumming, which he kind of refers to in this a little bit, because he's
Yeah,
been playing with top flight guys, and now he actually is just playing with a bunch of punk
right.
teenagers.
Yeah, pretty much. It, but that had to be exciting on its own to, see the world through their eyes, on tour and things like that. That
Oh
had
yeah,
to
yeah,
be
just
that had to be kind of cool. The attention
musically,
that you get.
satisfying. I'm not so sure, but 'cause
Right.
the first major band I played in, we just had a fantastic drummer. So every band I played it after that, I was always like, oh, just like, because a good drummer pretty much makes a band most of the time.
They're the driver.
The only time it really worked out with a less technically proficient guy was just, again, getting someone just bashing the hell out of it. So it's like you either need to learn to play well or just hit them as hard as you can.
To your point about those guys in a jazz setting, I just recalled one of the piano players, Don Randy. He used to do a jazz gig at the Baked Potato, and I remember being maybe 15 or 16, and I bought an album by Don Randy, because he had some covers on there that I was familiar with, and he kind of was trying to like get that little Ramsey Lewis type vibe, but he was a good player.
Oh, right, yeah.
So that was the closest I can recall any of them to a jazz thing.
Sorry, you just blew my mind, because when you said Ramsey Lewis, my eyes were going over a Ramsey Lewis cover. So I was like, oh, that's trippy.
Oh.
I mean, they're just all sitting. I have these bricks of CDs next to me. So
Right.
for about 10 years ago, when they realized nobody was going to buy, CDs anymore, they just started putting out, I don't know if you get these in America, but these little vinyl reproduction boxes.
Oh.
So that's 20 Miles Davis albums, like Columbia stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they box them all, the Columbia years and the Blue Note years.
Yeah, I think I flashed.
Like
yeah, I flashed you the Philadelphia one last time we were on.
Right.
Because they're all just like right here for easy
the
access.
Philadelphia years.
Yeah. What session would you want in on, if you could go back in time and get in on one of these?
Oh wow! I would have probably enjoyed playing on a Sinatra session.
Oh, but Sinatra himself might be a little intimidating.
Yeah, a little. There's in the book again. There's a great story about Glenn Campbell and Frank Sinatra, if I can share with you. Glenn Campbell was a huge Sinatra fan, and he could not believe he was going to get to play on a Sinatra record. I'm kind of assuming it may have been something stupid, but he never named the song. The song something stupid.
Right.
And he asked to be set up right next to the vocal booth so he could watch Frank do his thing. So the whole time he's going through the session, and and this is Glenn telling the story in the book, and he says that he's just smiling over there. He's on cloud nine. He's playing with his idol. And at the end of the session, Frank's in the control room with his posse or bodyguards or whatever, and they're talking to the engineer, and Glenn Campbell's just kind of hanging out. So after Frank leaves, he goes up to the control room, and he's telling the engineer, he's like, man, it was such a great session with Frank and everything. The guy's like, yeah. He goes, did he have anything to say about me? And the engineer looks at him and said, yeah, he did ask one question. And Glenn's like, what? He said he wanted to know who the faggot staring at him all day was. Which is typical of Frank,
Yeah, I thought you were going to be like, oh, we erased your track. So
no.
It's a better story that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, I just finished reading a book about Warner Brother Records, and it was kind of interesting how long that label resisted going into anything like rock, because
Oh,
with
uh, uh,
Sinatra.
um, I think a lot of them did
Yeah,
at
and
first.
until the one or two slipped in and the checks started rolling, and then they changed their
Exactly.
minds real quick. But
Yeah.
um,
When the youth of America decides to spend their money, you're going to go that direction.
I was actually a little surprised how early. I never really thought of these guys being in effect in the late '50s so much. I guess probably because they weren't playing so much rock at the time.
No, probably none.
Yeah, that's when you're getting these TV themes and
Yeah.
again those swing sessions and stuff.
And even the TV themes started getting a lot slicker once the Wrecking Crew came in.
Oh yeah,
You know,
most certainly.
because the arrangers had, you know, now you could borrow. You didn't have to just stick to um, either kind of an orchestral type theme or maybe even a jazz based theme. You could combine it with some rock elements and things, and these were the guys that could do it.
Yeah, I'm just here thinking that those '60s themes could definitely take '80s themes out back and beat the crap out of
Oh
them.
yeah, absolutely. I'll take Mission Impossible over any '80s TV show theme.
The Full House is what was coming to mind first. I guess it's
Yeah,
a little more '90s.
okay.
But, oh, that there, I got just made that get stuck in your head. Um,
I was thinking of that one that Alan Thicke was on.
the Growing Pains. Was that Growing
Yeah,
Pains?
that might have been it. I didn't watch
Family
much of that.
Ties. Yeah, I'd see them, after school in like a block, so I couldn't really distinguish which one was which.
Right. And now you don't get themes with most TV shows.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that started with Lost, where the theme is just boom.
Yeah, they
But
what
in
what?
Japan, they ruin shows like Lost and other shows like that where it's trying to be dramatic or that they'll get
Uh-huh.
like a J-pop idol and use the show to promote like their new single or something. So each season of Lost, the theme song in Japan is a different J-pop song.
Well, and they do that here. It's like a lot of TV shows will be what their parent company, might be Warner Brothers, might be a parent company, and so they will find their newest artist that they're trying to break. Um, like Grey's Anatomy does this, all the time. But about 10 years ago, they broke some artist because they had her music come in during, a very touching death scene, and people started writing in, and um, so the next thing you know, this record is a smash hit. So that's where they introduce new music now and sidestep having to pay for a theme.
Yeah, I just had a friend who was on the podcast who said Warner had just bought his band's album for that purpose.
Yeah.
Just not like they're, I guess, distributing the record, but they're going to use it, in a TV show or a movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but
And if something sticks, then they'll go with it.
yeah, I mean, he's got shows to play either way, so whatever.
Yeah.
As a guitarist, one thing I thought was interesting was they almost just an aside where I just mentioned, oh, you got to always be stocked with light gauge strings, and
Oh,
that's got
yeah.
to be a difference between, I guess, being a more live player or a session player, because I've always, maybe it's because I started with bass, but I usually end up putting like bridge wires on my guitars.
I don't know what those are.
Just real thick strings
Oh, okay.
that you can pummel, because I'd put
I,
thick strings on the guitar and then break two of them in a show, so
I know with guitar, when you put, especially if you have very thin strings, you can bend them more, but they're harder to keep in tune.
yeah, since I've become more of a playing at home guy, I've gone kind of to medium, but not all the way to the light gauge. So I think the bridge wire reference was Dick Dale. He said he put bridge wires on his guitars
Okay.
because if you know Dick Dale, he would just play the most aggressive
Oh
away
yeah.
ever. I mean, so that
Yeah.
was my one regret selling my old Telecaster was the scratch plate actually did have blood stains on it. So
Yeah, I hope you got extra for
no, I was too beat up to get much for it at all. I,
it.
it was the maple fretboard were just worn down in multiple places, all that sort of stuff.
Uh,
Lots of dings. Come on, Telecaster always looks beat up.
it's not really a guitar if it's not.
Well, I was saying that I recently came across a new Telecaster, and it's perfectly clean, and it probably is going to stay that way unless I just decide to throw it down the stairs to see what happens. But
Yeah, somebody just gave me a Strat, and I don't have it close enough where I can grab it, but it's red. It's got the tuning pegs are the lock kind, and I was like, this has got to be some kind of knockoff. This can't be an actual Fender. But I took it to somebody that knows guitars, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a
someone
Fender.
probably installed the locking one.
I don't know. I looked it up online, and it's just a newer one, and
Yeah.
you know, so I
Oh,
don't know
wait
how
a
to
minute.
tune it.
I almost want you to. I almost want to see it. I think I might know the one you're talking about. Is the headstock kind of backwards looking?
Um, I'll go get it.
Okay, now I'm curious. Yeah.
All
So,
right. Pause for a second.
yeah, sure. Okay, it's back in. Oh, okay. Yes, yes, yes. That's like an '80s Fender when they were trying to get in with the metal crowd.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's very metally.
Yeah, yeah. There was they put something to it like the zing, and it's not zing, but it's something better than that. But yeah. They briefly tried to get into the metal crowd, but the metal guys, they wanted their ESPs and their Jacksons, and they weren't gonna do a Fender. So, but yeah, that's the most metal Fender I've seen. I also got one of those combination jazz P bass Fenders, and it looks kind of metalish, but you can dial it to sound very Motown without much trouble. So it looks metal, but that was some back to Motown. I did learn for any bass players, if you really want that sound on a P bass, turn your tone knob almost all the way down. It sounds like crap when you're playing by yourself, but then when you put in a mix, it just sounds phenomenal.
There's a 6-part series that's running now on Hulu with Rick Rubin and Paul McCartney, and he talks about when he first heard Jamerson and how he was different ways they were trying to emulate that tone
Yeah, and
on his bass.
and I wonder if they ever figured out turn the tone knob all the way down.
I don't know if they got that far, but
that's counterintuitive for a guitar player because you're like it always sounds, it's brighter the more up, so you're like, oh, turn it all the way up. Another one is to get Eric Clapton sort of a cream tone. You also would do that. You'd go to the the neck pickup, and then turn your tone all the way down and turn the fuzz all the way up, and it sounds that's the cream tone. The woman tone, I think is what he called it, but I'm not quite sure, and I probably don't want to know, especially with there's Clapton. That's a dude where you probably don't want to know all of his politics and stuff.
probably not.
Sorry. He's a little better at keeping his mouth shut, I guess, than some people most of the time. Give me one moment. I'm going to make a horrible noise here. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. This had some cable issues. So now I know to edit a spot. Okay. How about underrated Wrecking Crew players? I mean, Carol Kay, Hal Blaine, Glenn Campbell. Their names always come up.
They're the stars, yeah. Sax player. His name comes up a few times, but what was his name?
Pills, was it?
Placer.
Okay, obviously it's underrated because we're having trouble getting
exactly.
the name out.
And and he even talks about how he did because he's the guy that plays the horn on Pink Panther. Um, and there was a commercial when I was a kid for Alka-Seltzer called "No Matter What Shape Your Stomach Is In," and it would be, they'd have all these different people: fat people, skinny people, hula dancers, the whole gamut. But everybody gets an upset stomach, and you take Alka-Seltzer. And the music the Wrecking Crew played, well, and he was the lead horn player, played the melody, played the solo, and played the bit at the end. Well, the record company, all of a sudden it started being the most requested song, so it became a #1 hit, and they put it out under a group called the Markets or the Marquettes, I think. And it really hurt him to the core that his name was nowhere to be found. And on the album cover, it's like four little white kids being credited with this.
And that's who they sent on the road.
Absolutely.
Well, they needed him to play.
But they did that. Phil Spector did that with his groups, the Crystals and the Ronettes. He'd have Darlene Love in there working her butt off, and she would never see a road gig.
When did the session folks really start getting credited? Because I feel like by the 70s, the new LA crew tended to get credited more.
Yes. In the 70s, you could start reading album credits and go, oh, who is this guy on playing guitar, and who's this horn player? You didn't get that in the 60s, and apparently the record companies didn't want it, because why would you want to buy a Byrds album and find out they're not even playing? You just bought Mr. Tambourine Man and they're not playing.
That is, the Byrds always fascinate me though with that, because I really do like the sound of the actual Byrds. I mean, because they're lo-fi.
They became a good band, but was it Roger McGuinn who actually had some experience? They let him actually play on the record, and Crosby and all them were Hillman. They were just not real happy. So, but he said, it was such a thrill playing with these guys. He said, the rest of the band was ticked off. He said, but when we did Turn, 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 it took 70 some takes. He said, Mr. Tambourine Man was done in 2.
Yeah, there's I think it's a Spanish Harlem incident where Chris Hillman seems to be playing the wrong note for like an entire verse. Sounds great, to be honest. So it's but it's just, he's playing the wrong note. It's like, okay, that's interesting. And
I mean, there are a lot of happy mistakes that happen.
I do like the sound of a band like about to fly apart at any moment and never does.
There is a I don't want to say a charm. There's an intensity about, are they going to make it? Are they going to make it? Or it adds an edge that you don't get from when something's very polished.
Yeah, I guess the replacements thing would be sort of my I guess early replacements would be my gold standard for that. Yeah. Hell, they probably did have studio. Well, they replaced their guitar player with basically a studio musician at some point. So
yeah. So but when you've got when you have it, you're still gonna work for that almost near perfect take.
And it is interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but even when I was with Curtis, we'd record something, and I'd get through the whole song, but at one point I'd hit a clam, and I'd just be, oh man, Curtis, can we punch that in? No, Cat, you had the feeling. And he would leave it. And, I'd be upset about it, but years later, I'm just like, I've heard better musicians than me hit clams on records.
No, I know the Beatles would say they could barely listen to their own recordings because they just hear the mistakes.
Well, I mean, you listen to Let It Be. right after the guitar solo on that verse, mother, when he hits that chord what was supposed to be the A minor chord, it is horrendous. You never notice it.
No, no, that's to the feel. Well, again, the feeling, right? You got the feeling. So
That's it. That's what it all boils down to. And the Wrecking Crew seemed to have the best of both worlds. They had the polish and they also had the feel for that stuff.
yeah, um, and I am thinking like a lot of kind of legacy bands. They do tend to find session musicians when they are plugging in, missing or dead members or whatever. We just did a show where we were talking about seeing the Who, like
Right.
where the guys talking to had seen the Who in the early '80s, had seen them recently, and it's like, well, yeah, you're not seeing Entwistle and Keith Moon, but Pino, what Pelin,
Palladino, yeah.
I just couldn't remember his name last time either. He's a top flight bassist. You're still getting a top flight
Absolutely.
bassist if you see the Who, and
Yeah.
and
Well,
Zach
it's like
Starkey learned from Keith Moon anyway, so.
yeah, it's like when the Stones replaced Bill Wyman.
Yeah.
You
Who?
know,
Well, why isn't Daryl Jones credited as a member of that band? He's been there for
he's not
20
allowed
plus
to.
years.
He's not allowed to be.
Okay.
Yeah, that was part of the deal because he wasn't a Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
Even
Okay.
though they do give it to Ron Woods. I guess
Exactly.
Ron's been there longer, but I actually like Daryl Jones better.
Yeah. Anyway, that always bugs me that he's not like an actual member. And I was
Yeah,
remembering being real confused in the mid '90s when that happened. Like, is he what?
yeah,
Huh?
he's not even allowed to talk about a lot of about the band.
Wow, crazy.
I mean, he can talk about, yeah, we're going out on tour or whatever, but he can't divulge any. He's got that NDA he has to live up to.
Right. Um, another band that kind of does a fun, I guess, Wrecking Crew reenactment would be the Wondermints, which are the bands, the core of the band that Brian Wilson's been touring with for almost 20 years now, and they do a pretty good job. They get that, yeah, that a little bit of that funk feeling. There's like, it's not reverb, but mm, there's like some peanut butter around the sounds of the Wrecking Crew, I guess.
Reverb is very important.
Yeah, but even beyond that, just I guess the sound, maybe it's a tapey sound, but that's I'm sitting here trying to do like the Grateful Dead thing, give us like make it the song sound like Purple Mist or something, right? But
Right.
so I'm thinking it's just a chunky peanut butter sound that you get on these LA '60s recordings.
Yeah, and it's even in the jazz circle, I was always more East Coast than West Coast because the West Coast sound, even on those records, there's always a certain polish to them. Whereas you listen to things that would come out of Motown or out of New York and things like that, there's always this edge. It's almost like what you were talking about, where um, you feel like it could fall apart at any minute, but it's not. It's being held together, but there's always this almost a galloping feeling like we're going to get there.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'll go East Coast. My favorite jazz musician is pretty much Sun Ra if I have to call out somebody. So you never know what you're going to get on one of his
No,
recordings.
you sure don't.
But you might get things that almost sound like big band, but something's a little off, or you might just get like screaming synthesizers and percussion.
Exactly.
So
You can get anything.
but that's part of the fun of that. So maybe
Yeah.
that's why. And also he has a movie and cool headgear. So
It's all about the headgear.
yeah. George Clinton knew that. Yeah.
Yes.
For some proto stuff.
And that's a band that if you've ever been, I don't know if you've ever been to any of the concerts, it's a revolving stage because they'll play for like 4 hours, but it's a revolving stage of musicians.
Yeah, that's definitely a legacy band worth. I have not seen them, but that's one I would love to.
Yeah, I mean,
even now.
a bass player, a different bass player may show up after the first 2 hours. Another drummer may go ahead and decide to start playing. It's a revolving door,
Something I
but it's always good.
something I saw, I guess it was about 10 years ago when I came back to Japan and I was training, and we went into like a little bar, which was kind of a jazz club. And there was a group there doing a pitch perfect Oscar Peterson. I mean,
Hmm.
Japanese folks, right? But pitch perfect, sounded great, but there was nothing more. That was it. It was just like, it sounds exactly like Oscar Peterson.
Right.
And that's, I mean, I'm sure that's what they're going for as well. But yeah, I was like, I'm enjoying this. I like it, but it was kind of like, what's the point?
Yeah, I've obviously been to Japan a lot for the last 30 years, and anytime I go here, jazz in Japan, you've got these amazing players, but there's just that little something that they're lacking that I think you can only get from the culture here. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, a little fire, but again, well, you got the technical precision, which we usually can't quite match up to. So depends what you're looking for, I suppose.
yeah, and the same thing, with LA and New York. Every geographical region in the states has its own kind of sound. Memphis had their own thing happening, just like the Wrecking Crew out in LA had theirs. The Funk Brothers out in Detroit. It's kind of, and you go to Florida and you get an entirely different vibe that nobody else can pick up, or New Orleans. So we have all these geographical um, differences in our music and our approach to music.
Would you say that's kind of going away these days? So much, kind of cyber collaborations maybe muddies
I,
up the
I
sounds.
it depends on what genre you're going for. Um, pop music is always going to be pop music. It's always going to be a bit sanitized to reach the masses. But grunge bands out of Portland sounded a whole lot different than uh, the New York Dolls, or that scene, when you start comparing those. And then when you take like the Police, did not sound like the scene that was happening in New York at the time. So I just think you do have a little more melding of cultures because it's a lot easier access.
Right.
We do have access to much more music than we've ever had before.
Oh, definitely. Too much. I mean, once you people can barely. I mean, people don't have the attention span for an album anymore, which makes me a little sad.
It is, and that's another pet peeve of mine. Or when CDs came out and everybody figured, well, I can get 70 minutes worth of music on here, I'm going to use it. And I find it very hard to listen to 70 minutes of anyone's music unless you're coming across with all A material.
Yeah, I feel like 35 minutes is like the perfect album length, which when I first started buying CDs, I was like, that's too short. I'm not getting my money's worth if the album's only
Right.
35 minutes. Of course, you can put, as a reissue, you can fit two albums on a CD. That's nice. But
Yeah, I always liked when I bought a record, you basically got 21 minutes on each side tops. And the good thing about it is you play that record and you flip it over and you play the next side. And when you got done, you would go, "Ooh, I really like that third song on the other side." And you'd play that again, and you would start singling out some tracks that just really hit you. And now, if I listen to a 70-minute CD, I don't want to hear it anymore. I'll wait till I hear it the next time to figure out what songs I'm going to like the most.
yeah, I was
So
just
that's just me, I guess. But
I just rewatched High Fidelity, a movie which I used to love, and I
oh
was like,
yeah,
wow, this one's dated not so well. But yeah, the whole idea of the perfect mixtape, which
oh yeah,
has been lost to the wind. A playlist is not a mixtape. and
yeah.
when we talked to our friend from 30 years ago, he's like, "Hey man, I still have that mixtape you made me in 1992." You know,
Wow.
so that's hip, right? um, one last thing I kind of want to throw out is I feel like the Wrecking Crew, the Funk Brothers, they never even started to get any sort of recognition until like 20 years after they were a thing. Um,
Right. I mean, what Hal Blaine was ended up being a security guard at one point.
right.
And
So who's being neglected now? Do we have like groups of session musicians that work together regularly, or is it all just like completely been dispersed in the industry?
yeah, I don't think I don't think we have the same kind of, you know, you're not seeing the Muscle Shoals and the Funk Brothers and that kind of thing anymore. Sessions are, you know, different producers bring in different musicians, um, and you can work all around the world. I mean, if I'm signed to Warner Brothers and I decide, you know, I'd really like to do my next album in Brazil. Okay, we got a studio there. We'll send you. And, you know, that's, so, you know, I don't know any Brazilian musicians. So it's not like they have a Brazilian wrecking crew. You know, maybe they do.
As well,
I don't know,
maybe they do.
you know, but, and maybe 20 years from now, we'll find out that there are other wrecking crews that are happening right now.
Yeah, actually, now you're mentioning, I feel like the next Wrecking Crew will probably come from like, like Lagos or something, where people are just going to realize, hey, there were these guys and they're just like kicking it for like 10 years straight, and now we're noticing. So that might be the thing. It's not going to be something out of America or England that's the next big studio set. Um, the one that
Yeah,
maybe gets me the
no,
most is David Bowie's last album, Black Star, where I think people were a little annoyed they didn't know he was dying yet, and they were like, "Why did you get
right,
rid of your touring band and bring in a bunch of other guys?" But
right.
maybe that's the modern equivalent of getting your session musicians, like just okay, swapping out my bands for a different sound now.
Well, and you know, like Yoko Ono used to bring in session. You know, all her albums musically are incredible. I mean, she had nothing more than New York's finest on those records. You know, and for a long time, I think you have different pockets of wrecking crews now. Like you go through the '70s, almost every disco record, Parliament, anything that had horns on it, the Brecker brothers and David Sanborn were the horn players.
Right. Of course, they
That's
got a lot more
that.
credit in their own albums, which is nice. So
Well, yes, and they got deals at all that,
yeah.
but they weren't credited per se. I never knew who played who the horn section was on, you know, certain records. They just, well, that's an after, because all that disco stuff, it was just coming out left and right in the early '70s. But I remember reading in Downbeat one issue where Randy Brecker said that they went into a club in New York and 32 of the first 35 songs they heard, they were the horn section, and they had no idea what any of it was being used for. They would just go, here, play these parts.
Oh, like not even like with
Yeah,
like
yeah,
just
they wouldn't even
overdub.
be playing necessarily to a full track,
Right. Okay. Yeah, that
you
would
know.
that would be a mind blower. Yeah.
So that's kind of like a reverse wrecking crew. We're going to construct the rest of the crew around you.
Well, that I think is again with cyber collaborations and things. That's probably more the norm these days. I'm setting off now to try and make like a 1970s electro folk rock recreation because I got all these lyrics from the 70s from a guy. So, but I'm talking to a couple folks and just trying to think of how to do it because that sound would best be made by a bunch of people playing in a room together, but I can't do that. So I
Yeah.
gotta kind of
Well, I'll be in a
improvise that.
room, so I'll be in a room. So you know, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, I actually I might do that. So,
Yeah.
but we should be wrapping up today with my normal excuse of train time's coming, but you've got a Twitch and stuff going now, so you should definitely talk about that.
Yeah, I just started maybe 2 months ago now. I just barely made affiliate status, so it's not like I've got thousands of followers. I don't even have hundreds or 100. But one I have one day where I'll do either. Sometimes I'll give I do Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays I'll do like a lesson or something like that, or like yesterday I took some isolated tracks from Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and the Beatles, and kind of broke down 4, 8, and 16 track recording, how recording kind of evolved. And then on Thursdays, I do an interview with different musicians, engineers, industry people, things like that. And that's kind of turning into a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, it's an addiction,
So
isn't it? Doing it. Um, where is the link or whatever for that?
it's just twitch.tv/Buzz Amato.
Okay, so
Yeah,
easy to find. But
easy to find.
this one is Aural Hygiene. We're on Twitter and Facebook and all of that. I also talk about sci-fi movies at Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary. If you search those words, you'll run into it. All of that is under the umbrella of Podcastio Podcastius. That's our Patreon. So the more people that support us there, the weirder stuff we'll do behind the Patreon wall. So
Yeah, I need to get involved in that too.
yeah.
This is all very new to me.
Oh, right. Yeah. Same here.
I surmised the other night that I'm probably the oldest person on Twitch.
You'd probably be surprised.
and you might find a gamer that's older than me or as old as me, but I don't think you'll find anybody else musically any older.
They all mumble rappers or something? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, let's go play some 45s.
All right.